Holy hedgehogs, everybody! It's Words About Books, the sexy book reading podcast that's taking the nation by storm. I am your gracious and handsome host, Nate, scholar, lord of podcasts, amateur writer. Joining me, as always, is my good friend, half man, half ginger man, Ben. How you doing, big buddy?
I'm a silent sidekick, so I cannot answer that. It's going to make for an interesting podcast and an even more interesting book where I say nothing in a heavily dialogue-based medium.
But you do occasionally laugh, because that does not count towards breaking your vow of silence.
No, I laugh, I gesture wildly, I communicate in sign language because it's not practical to maintain a vow of silence in a heavily action-oriented environment. Anyway, if you haven't figured it out, we're covering the legendary How to Pick Up Women with a Drunk Space Ninja, the Duke LaGrange Adventures, Book 1 by Jay Key. I have no idea.
Actually, is now a good time to just throw out there, since this is going out in November, I can probably just say that I got my wife pregnant, and there's going to be more of me running around, and that's a scary thought.
Yeah. Well, I won't let you out of your podcast obligations, so hopefully...
Yeah, it was an ironclad contract.
Yeah, hopefully that child doesn't demand too much of your time.
I think that, it'll be fine.
Yeah, no,
just give it a bottle or something, and then you sit here for an hour. Daddy has to go record.
No, you planned this impeccably. It's not like you and your wife both have major life events going on outside of this. I'm sure there will never be any scheduling conflicts.
Nah, we're good.
But yes, Nate has spawned. Congratulations. I'll edit in like a clapping.
Yes. Wonderful. All right. Let's go back to the book. Over to you.
Okay, so this is going to be a two-parter. We decided that up front because it seems like with a lot of the indie and self-published books we're trying to cover, that the story surrounding their publication, the story of how the author came to decide to write this book, is kind of interesting in its own right, and I actually want to devote quite a bit of time to talking about Jay Key and the origins of Duke LaGrange. So we're going to skip the about the author for this episode. We're just going to cover the book in this episode, and then part 2 is going to be kind of the meta-narrative of how this book came to be. So look forward to that. In the meantime, we're going to focus purely on the content of the book. And there's a lot to say about that as well. So, Nate, why don't you give us a quick summary, and then we'll dive into the many, many problems I have.
Don't interrupt me too much. I'm going to try and slam it out in like 5 minutes. And
also, how your child got conceived.
Damn right. Actually, that's being generous. Let's be real here. 45 seconds, in and out. We'll slam this out in 5 minutes. And let us know at WAB Pod on Twitter if you like shorter or longer summaries, if you have an opinion. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. My life as a teenage space ninja is the story of Duke LaGrange, a wise, cunning, sexy, charming, arrogant, unlikable idiot who bullies people and casually laughs off murder in 1 minute and then selflessly saves children the next. He's also a space Texan, which sounds like the worst thing ever. His sidekick, Ishirashe, is a sidekick from the Sidekick Academy, who is a Japanese-Irish space ninja with no parents. Together, they terrorize vulnerable women for sex. No, I'm not joking. That's the book's word choice. Duke LaGrange and Ashira are hanging out, getting drunk in a bar, and unsuccessfully picking up chicks when a fight breaks out, caused by Ashiro. Sprinkles, the killer robot terrorist / lead singer in a band, attempts to murder the duo. A burger kills a woman, and Duke gets his ass kicked by the ceiling because he's incompetent. They escape to the Deus Ex Machina, which is the name of his ship, and also a Deus Ex Machina. Only smart people will understand what happens next when the ship magically gets them out being blown up, only to accidentally get them eaten by an angry red portal. On the other side of the portal, they decide to land on the nearest planet for some reason so the plot can happen. The planet is a Bronze Age level backwater shithole, and the first city they come upon is almost entirely abandoned except for the fanatical priests that inhabit it. The explanation for where all the people went is that they're working. But Duke thinks nothing is shady here because Duke is a total buffoon. Later that night at dinner, it turns out the priests were evil! Oh no! They save a child because Duke has a sudden heart of gold, and then one of the priests accidentally shoots himself in the face with a shotgun because he can't operate guns despite the fact that children accidentally use guns all the time. Duke and Ashira use this as an opportunity to flee back to their ship, only to find their ship is gone and in its place is an entire army of priest warriors. A dramatic fight ensues, where Duke uses his unlimited ammo shotgun and pistol to kill hundreds of armed foot soldiers before he's forced to flee directly into a trap set by anti-priest rebels. Ninja Brian doesn't bust out because he's suddenly not a very good ninja. The rebels want to overthrow Orbius Orbgasm, the Orb-Lord of the world, a silly earthling who came here to fix crops and ended up enslaving the entire planet. His solution to every problem is to kill it or enslave it, sometimes both. After way too much arguing, Duke and the rebels decide to join up. Their leader, Ja, oscillates between being lax and unfit for command and being very authoritative and commanding. There's also Pole and a bunch of cardboard cutout extra nobody likes. Pole doesn't trust Duke because the last human to come to the planet enslaved everyone. Duke doesn't like Pole because he's a big meanie head. Together, the two bicker like small children for 80% of the book. Pole also happens to die a bunch of times but somehow survives. The group wants to free a town from slavery next, but Duke thinks that those who submit to slavery won't rise up against their masters and is then proven right immediately because Duke is a tactical genius. Duke uses the power of having guns to save the day and is repaid by having the former slaves try to murder him because they don't want to be free. Alright! The group goes to meet a council of one old guy who has them form the Fellowship of the Orb and sends them off to die with no real plan. The last party sent out also died, and the next party will almost assuredly die, but maybe if they keep trying, someday they'll get it right. So the group has to travel through a swampland full of cannibals that they have to hide from at night. So they decide to light a bunch of humongous fires near the only landmark in the area and hope for the best with obvious consequences. They also meet a friendly giant who is the former keeper of the orb before a man gets horribly murdered and eaten by swamp cannibals, and all of his comrades cry because you can't have comedy without horrifying tragedy. Once that's over, the group find two priests going to kill another priest named Vern. They argue for like 2 hours about whether to save this guy when Duke can solve the problem in 3 seconds with his fucking guns. It's okay, though, because the priests are really cool and don't just kill Vern while they're all debating. The party saves Vern, who warns them of being led in a trap. Duke believes him because Duke is always right. Why don't you believe him too, you big stupid idiot? One rebel betrays and kills a guy, and then he gets killed trying to kill Vern, and everyone argues a lot. Eventually they meet another giant and his fire-breathing cats that everyone knows about but nobody believes exist. The giant drops him off at another slave camp, but this time slavery is bad because the camp is torturing their slaves. Vern gets them in the castle, a bunch of fighting happens, they surrender to Orvius for no reason, a bunch of other shit happens, and the Orb Master gets shot by someone other than Duke, and killed instantly because Duke wasn't actually important at all. The book ends with Ja becoming empress and asking her people to forgive the priests because they were just following orders. This is followed by 3 minutes of alright sex with Duke, followed by 45 minutes of her explaining that it's a common thing and it happens to everybody. Duke gets the orb and somehow fixes his ship, then he flees back to the bar with Pole tagging along so they can continue to bicker for books to come because Duke is insufferable, and that's the story of how to pick up women like a drunken man-child. Back to you, Ben.
So I want to say, just that brief summary, I'm concerned that people will think parts of this book were funny because your summary made it sound somewhat entertaining. It's like, oh, look at all these ridiculous premises and how they combine, like, oh, that's so silly how they send people out. No, that's all played 100% straight. Everything he just said that sounded funny or comedic, that's not the joke. That's the part you're supposed to take seriously.
The lion's share of the book is 2 men bickering like an old married couple and bullying each other. So if that's what you want from your book, this is the book for you.
I'm going to say, like, I don't even know where to begin talking about this one, because it's like, just everything is wrong. How to Pick Up Women with Drunk Space Ninja. Based on that title, and based on the cover, which I know you're not supposed to judge books by their cover, but we all
People
do.
People judge books by their cover all the time. That's why one of the pieces of advice I got when we were publishing our book was you need to have a really good-looking cover.
Right. So this stuff kind of sets the tone of the book, or the expected tone of the book. And I think if you read the back of the book, he says something about like drunk ninjas, anthropomorphic musk oxen, which by the way, he's really in love with that. I mean, this is like episode 2 stuff, but he's really in love with that anthropomorphic musk ox thing. Like he's the first person to ever think of a minotaur. And the anthropomorphic musk ox is in like 2 paragraphs of the book. He's marketing it as this like madcap, ridiculous comedy. But 90% of the book is them walking through the woods, arguing about who should stand where. I don't know, like, there's all this, like, wacky shit going on the cover and on the back of the book. And it's, so we thought, like, bare minimum, this is going to be silly. This is going to be a silly, quick read, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
It is absolutely not that.
I was excited to read this book based on the cover and the premise.
I thought, like, at worst, it was going to be, like, bad fan fiction. And it was going to be funny just because it failed.
Right.
It's not so bad it's good. It's boring. It is so goddamn boring. It is 352 pages long. And I can tell you right now, and like we've said this about other books, but like right now, your summary was funnier because it was shorter. The more detail you go into about how ridiculous things work, the less funny it is. The book is constantly straddling this line between silly over-the-top things happening that we're supposed to laugh at and silly, stupid things happening that Jake He does not realize are stupid and silly. And it's, like, bizarre.
And a lot of really weird, serious stuff, like a guy being devoured by cannibals. How would you describe Duke?
Duke is a trope within a trope within a trope. He is like a DeviantArt OC. The author is obviously very proud of this concept he's created of an Indiana Jones styled Han Solo acting James Bond playboy. Like, if you can just imagine every kind of toxic male stereotype and put them together with what starts out with a smidge of self-awareness, like, that's kind of funny when it's self-aware and when the humor is at Duke's expense. Because it's kind of like the, like I got Archer vibes a little bit, where Archer is that James Bond parody. Like, what if James Bond were a real person? He'd be an absolute monster. He's an egotistical man-child who just constantly fucks everything up and gets a bunch of people killed. Like, that's Archer, right?
Right.
And so the joke is always at the expense of Archer. Archer is never portrayed as a very happy genius who gets everything he wants and everything works out for. Like, every episode of Archer is always he's the butt of the joke, unless it's a weird growth moment, in which case Archer's learning a lesson and softening his behavior. So, like, softening his behavior leads to rewards. That's how that works. But with Duke, his behavior is not a problem. Like, it starts out self-aware. It starts out, like, over the top, like, oh, isn't it funny and campy how, like, stereotypically, like, male power fantasy Duke is. But then it very quickly becomes the thing it's parodying.
Here's a question that I find myself having to ask a lot. Am I supposed to like Duke?
Yes.
How? Why? He starts the book as a childish buffoon, and there was a point in the book, and I mentioned in summary, he saves a child from being beaten by some priests, and I found myself having to ask why he would do that, because it doesn't seem like something that's in his character to do.
Right.
It definitely feels like there should have been some hesitation there to start with, and then he has an arc.
Which is probably how that relationship should have developed with Duke, where it's like Duke doesn't want to save the kid because children are a burden. And then over time, he bonds with the child and becomes like paternal towards it. But the problem is, and the reason I say you're supposed to like Duke, is because the author will never do anything purposely to make you dislike Duke. He couldn't write that scene that way because then Duke wouldn't be super awesome. If Duke didn't want to save a child, then Duke would have a flaw. And Duke is not allowed to have flaws because he's very cool. The author goes out of his way to make sure Duke is always right. Duke
does come off like he's read the script, because he's always sensing these like hidden motives and these double meanings, and he's always figuring out things ahead of everyone else, even if it makes no sense for him to think those things. Like he decides to go inside the temple because, oh, what if there's another orb in there? Despite the fact that, why would you think that? Why would you believe that?
It was such a weird thing to think. I almost thought there had to be another orb in there. It was literally like, if you're reading Lord of the Rings, right? And I'm going to compare this to Lord of the Rings because weirdly that's a fit for this book. Particularly Fellowship of the Ring. Particularly the most boring parts of Fellowship of the Ring. So imagine Duke as Aragorn, right? He's the much more competent, much more powerful guy traveling with these fish out of water types. And they stumble across a castle full of ring wraiths. And they're like, we've already got this ring, right? And it's called the One Ring, leading you to believe that there's one. But what if there's two?
It's a good point. What if there's two?
We should go into that castle and find out if there's another ring in there. There could be a ring in that castle.
Now, I will have to add one thing to your comparison. Imagine that while they're traveling, Aragorn is constantly calling the hobbits really small and like making fun of their hairy feet and like just generally berating them for existing, even though they really did nothing wrong. That would be this book.
It's so bizarre. Like, so that's one of the things where it's like there's this temple and it's spooky and it's possibly a trap. Their party is poorly equipped for the mission they're on. They're on a stealth mission. As a result, they're just trying to sneak into this place and assassinate this guy. And to be quite frank, it's probably a suicide mission because they have no end game. They have no escape plan. They have no weapons other than the ones Duke brought that they didn't know they'd have. And Duke decides, we got to investigate this temple, this mysterious temple in the middle of nowhere. There's a mysterious temple in the middle of nowhere. We've got to investigate it. We've got to investigate it right now. Because what if there's something inside there that could help us on our mission? And I'm just like, what? What do you think? Like, he thinks there could be another orb in there. Another all-powerful orb. And also, unclear in this book what the orb even is. Let's recount the events of the book very briefly from your summary. It's just, everything is wrong. But the reason I wanted to recount the events of the book is because I want to break down where it fails at each level. So, Duke gets transported to this area of space against his will. Duke lands on the planet. He needs to land for two reasons. He needs to figure out where he is, and he needs to try to make repairs to the ship. They find some suspicious stuff. They encounter these priests, whatever. It's all going good up until this point, right?
Absolutely.
The first part is like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They're in a bar in space. Wacky, zany shit's happening. And that's what you expected. That's what this book was supposed to be. It was supposed to be what the first 40 pages of the book were.
And what the cover depicted.
Yes, the cover literally depicts the bar in space, because that is the most interesting part of this book.
It's at the very beginning for like 4 chapters, and it's the final chapter, and everything else in between is this stupid Bronze Age planet.
And literally the most advanced technology on this planet is the bow and arrow. So Duke is kind of like a super being amongst them because he has weapons. Like, he has a laser gun, I guess laser shotgun, and so Duke is automatically the most powerful guy in any fight until they encounter the guy with the orb at the very end. 90% of the book is them walking around. Maybe not 90%, maybe like literally 75% of the book is them walking around. And they have these strange conversations that I can only describe as like, I don't know how many people in the audience have ever played a game of Dungeons and Dragons. But typically one of the things that happens in Dungeons and Dragons, it's just happened with every group I've ever played with, is when you encounter a situation where you're about to fight and you've got four people in the party who all want to have their say in how they think they should approach this fight. And these discussions break out where it's like, you stand over there and then I'll stand over here. You go behind this rock and I'll cast this spell and you do this attack and I'll cast this cantrip, and they plot out the entire fight, how they think it's going to go. That's how this book reads. But like the situations that are happening in this book are like a priest is about to be murdered. And I don't mean on like an executioner stage. I mean, 2 guys are walking towards him with weapons to stab him right now. They just stabbed him. That's how long they have.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is about that is they were worried, like, if we spring this attack on them, we could lose some of our numbers. It's like, all right, it's 6 on 2, and you have the advantage of surprise, and Duke could shoot them from here in 2 seconds and it's over. Why are you debating this? And so much of the debate was just pointless filler garbage that went on way too fucking long. It was wearing on my last nerve.
Oh yeah, so there's 2 kinds of long, boring conversation that happen in this book. And they're often nearly interchangeable. Like, I could take huge chunks of dialogue in this book and swap them with dialogue that happens hundreds of pages later, and you wouldn't notice. You wouldn't notice it had come from earlier in the book because nothing fucking changed. Pol and Duke don't like each other. Pol doesn't like Duke because Duke's an alien, and Duke doesn't like Pol because Pol was mean to Duke one time because he didn't want to trust an alien, because the last alien they'd encountered, by the way, they're a Bronze Age civilization, the last alien they encountered enslaved their entire race. So why this guy even recognizes them as aliens and not some kind of fucking demons, I don't know. But they know about aliens. They're pretty chill with that. Like they adapted real quick to them being having first contact, realizing they're not alone in the universe, and now aliens show up sometimes. Oh, they also have these godly weapons, and they enslave us. And the thing is, if he had been self-aware of that, of like how weird that situation is, he could have played it for laughs. I feel like I have to explain what comedy is to this author. Like, I'm not joking. I wish I was joking. I wish I was being funny. But comedy is a subversion, right? So things are funny when you expect one thing to happen, but another thing happens. That's sort of the essence of it. So we are trained to think first contact is going to be this big, existential dilemma, and just volumes and volumes have been written on how complex and important this event is. And so a nice subversion of the first contact trope would be, yeah, they just don't care. I guess you're here to enslave us now. Oh, well, it's Tuesday. Like, you're laughing. You're laughing because it's a joke. Do you get it? But he doesn't do that. It's just played 100% straight. Why would they think it's weird? He doesn't know, because he's not self-aware. He's not thinking about the story. He doesn't realize it's weird for them not to react. So I can tell you there was a few times where the book made me laugh. Like,
was it when he yelled, "Holy hedgehogs"?
God, no. I guess we should talk about why you keep saying that.
That's his catchphrase. And again, if the author intent is to be a suave, cool kind of James Bond ladies' man, yelling "Holy hedgehogs" is the opposite of that.
So the whole problem with this book, I think I'm talking myself into a thesis statement here.
Good.
The whole problem with this book is a lack of self-awareness. When the book manages to be self-aware, it manages to be funny. Those are the times when I laugh. And the Holy Hedgehogs thing, I think that was from a moment of self-awareness, because, again, that's a subversion. You expect the cool guy to say something cool, but then he says "Holy hedgehogs." Funny joke. But it was at least a joke. But then once they get into this long trek across the planet, he literally walks from like one hemisphere to the other. And boy, do I get the impression that he walked from one hemisphere to the other.
This was a longer trek than the trek they made in Dune.
Yeah, like page length wise, it's up there with that. But without any of the, like, for Dune at least, there was some interesting stuff in the descriptions of how they survived the desert. Like the various technologies that had been developed to endure on this planet. I thought that was kind of neat. And then they had some interesting conversations along the way that did a bit of exposition. But with this, the conversations are just, I don't like you either, but I don't like you more, and I don't like you more. And it's like, shut up!
And then they smirk at each other.
Oh, and they're constantly like playing little jokes on each other to try to like make like, it's like two kids who have a crush on their hot teacher.
Yeah, that is what it comes across as.
Yeah, and they don't know. They have no chance, obviously, with like an adult woman, and they just keep doing like little things to try to make the other one look less cool, and it comes off as like juvenile things that she wouldn't even care about, and she kind of like has to be like, okay, guys, enough.
Should we mention the fact that Duke thinks to himself that he's not used to just laying next to a vulnerable woman?
Only in the sense that he makes bad writing choices.
That is a bad writing choice. So I'm not going to ascribe intent. I'm not going to say Jay Key is like a bad person or something, but someone should have proofread that.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's two times that really call out to me as like problematic, and that was one. And then the other one is when he's hitting on the girl in the bar, and then she eats one of the burgers that sometimes kills you, which I guess is supposed to be a joke, and she dies. And he steps over the corpse, and he thinks something like, "Well, guess I'm not getting with her tonight." Funny joke. And so it's like, both of those were a little
gross,
dark, like that. But I will give him this. I did get that vibe that I don't think that's what he meant.
Yeah.
But that's how it came off.
Absolutely. But
it came off as making Duke a lot darker than I think he intended it to be. And that's why I say it was just a bad writing choice in a series of terrible writing choices. And I'll just say right now, this book, we have had discussions before about bad books. And
God.
we have always said, like, oh, this needs an editor. I want to briefly talk about what we mean by that. So, writing to me and editing are two separate skills that an author should try to develop. And editing is possibly the more difficult skill. So, writing is the act of actually getting your thoughts onto paper and maybe doing it in a way that is enjoyable to read so that you have prose that like flows and the timing is good and the pace is good. And it's almost a little bit like poetry. But editing is deciding what to keep and when something isn't working. And it's harder for a person to edit their own writing because you can only approach it with your perspective. The things you write tend to make sense to you. And this is true in everything in your life. It is very hard to evaluate your own work objectively. I have a hard time, like if I test my own code, I am not going to find all the bugs. If I look at a wall I painted, something as simple as that, I'm less likely to notice a missed spot than somebody who just walks in with a set of fresh eyes. That's why big books like that are published in not independently, but I don't even want to say that, like books that are published with the aid of a third-party editor tend to be better because they can identify those things and they can help you fix them. Now, this book was published independently, and this is getting into some episode 2 stuff, but Jay Key, unfortunately, I don't think this book needs an editor. Like, I can't... When we talked about Lovecraft and The Fold and Marked and some of the books we had generally negative opinions of, I did think if you let me take a crack at editing that book, I could fix this. So we said they needed a second draft or an editor. This, I cannot fix. This needs completely redone. This is wrong from the ground up.
Yes, I agree.
The ideas
absolutely.
are terrible. The prose is terrible. This is a vanity project, and it screams vanity project. I mean, just the sheer lack of self-awareness. Like, the first thing I would tell him is, this is a terrible plot. This is a terrible plot for this character. Why is Duke Lagrange, bar-hopping, drunk space ninja guy, like... Why are they on a planet in the Bronze Age? This is how you want to introduce this kid? This is the first adventure with this character? The bounty hunter who never hunts a bounty?
I would agree with you. And especially because there were... I mean, the thing that got me is there were a lot of contradictions to itself. Like, Ja was a leader who seemed unsure at the beginning, and she put everything to a vote. And then when it came to the temple, she got super pissed off. She was commanding Duke to do stuff, even though Duke wasn't under her command. And then after that, she was putting everything to a vote again. And the big thing was the slavery depiction. The first chapter it's introduced, it's like, yeah, why did you kill our slave masters? Like, we didn't want to be saved. We enjoy working in the mines because it means that we get to at least live. They're not going to kill us, they're just going to work us to death. So, you know, slavery, I guess, is okay on this world. Ha ha ha. But then the next chapter with slavery, it's like the worst thing ever. They're in a filthy cage, just crowded in there, and they're just being tortured for no reason with like a board with nails in it just rubbing around them. And I feel like And then again, this is my opinion. I'm trying to figure out how these two completely different depictions of the same thing could come into existence. And I felt it was, well, I don't want to throw out the other chapter because, like, that was a lot of time and effort to get my thoughts down, and, like, I'm going to just keep them both in.
I disagree.
You disagree?
I think the slavery depiction, I think that was another one of these big brain moves where it's like, do you know sometimes in light media like cartoons and sci-fi, slavery is depicted as this like bad but not that bad thing. It can be funny. Like there was to borrow a thing J.K. probably likes, Futurama had that one episode where they wound up building a pyramid for Bender.
Yes. And does he realize why that, yes, in the real world, slavery is fucking awful, but maybe that shouldn't be depicted?
No. I think he realized it in real time, Nate. I think he was like, wait a minute. We see all these depictions of slavery that are lighthearted and funny, but in reality, it's pretty bad.
But then why didn't he cut the first chapter, Ben? That doesn't make sense because he sees both depictions of slavery. It's not like he was told...
Did I stutter when I said it was flawed from the ground up?
Okay. That's fair.
Like, dude, you're talking about the internal logic of a book, and I'm telling you, like, before he ever got to the point of characterization or plot, it was already broken.
I have also written stories that have been completely flawed from the ground up. Do you know what I did with them?
You published them. You started your own publishing company, and you published them, and you made a press release packet for yourself, and you joined the Sci-Fi Writer, Fantasy Writer Association, and you decided this was your career now.
No, Ben. I threw it in the garbage. I had a 120-page book that I wrote back in the day that sucked, and I just threw it all away. We didn't publish it just to have a book out.
Yeah, I'm going back to my thesis statement. I think self-awareness is the name of the game when it comes to Duke LaGrange. Grange. I don't know his name.
Duke LaGrange.
Duke LaGrange would be awesome. Like a Kurt Cobain band guy going around.
Solving
playing
mysteries.
Shows,
punching
playing
people
shows,
in the face.
Solving mysteries. Yeah.
Beating up space Nazis and kissing women on the mouth.
Yeah, I think, okay, core concept. We've got a core concept now. You know what? Wouldn't it be funny if, to prove a point, we just wrote Duke LaGrange to just show how hard it is to fuck this up? Like, all you've got to do is write light, funny stuff and not boring, bland nonsense.
Well, that's what I was saying. That depiction of hyper-realistic slavery doesn't fit with fun, light comedy. Being devoured by cannibals does not fit into fun, light comedy. That's horrible.
There's two ways you can have comedy. You can have... Well, there's more than two ways, but we're going to do broad strokes here. You can go dark. You can go light. Duke LaGrange wants to go light. And so the dark stuff in the book is not played for laughs. It's an attempt to put some heart into the humor. And again, it just fails on every level. And there's really, it kind of, I love bad fan fiction.
I'm pretty sure it's one of your favorite pastimes, actually.
It kind of is. I do like dumb things, and it doesn't take a lot to make me laugh. One of the reviews I read of this book that gave it, I think it was a positive review, was the guy said, less humor than I expected.
Well, 5 out of 5.
I don't think he gave it 5 out of 5, and I was like, yeah, right? Like that, if you gave this book to like a test audience of randomly selected people, even if you randomly selected from your target demographic, I think most of them would say charitably, I expected it to be funnier. And they wouldn't necessarily say that meaning I expected your jokes to be funnier. I would mean that as I expected there to be more jokes. So if I had to give advice on how to fix this, first thing, complete rewrite. You went way too far with this before you asked me for my help. Second, you need to lean in to the drunk space ninja stuff. Like, I gotta tell you, I don't like this style of comedy. When the comedy comes through, it's not my thing. I don't mind Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I've read all the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books and the short stories, and I can tell you it kind of, for me, overstayed its welcome. Eventually, you have enough Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I think he has a silly sense of humor. I think he wanted to go for a kind of like airplane style comedy. Or
Bruce Campbell. That's a book we've read.
Bruce Campbell, yes. Like Army of Darkness would be a really good reference for this. Because Army of Darkness is about a man from the future going to the past, and he's an egotistical prick. And it's funny because he's ridiculous. But the story knows he's ridiculous, and Ash does not have to be super cool guy. But he's almost afraid to have Duke Lagrange also not be cool. But you can't have... Comedy has to subvert. Like, the hero being cool is not a subversion. That's not comedic. You needed to lean more into the comedy. You needed to lean way more into the comedy. Even if it's not my brand of humor, you needed to go hard into that.
It was my brand of humor.
Yeah. Well, it needed to be like a joke a minute. Like when they're in the bar, it's a joke a minute.
Yes, you led me astray, Ben, because you kept showing me lines from the bar, and it was before you probably got past the bar. It was before I started the book. And you're like, did you write this? And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a fun book, probably. Like, oh.
It did. It really reminded me of your sense of humor.
Yeah, and then it just falls off a fucking cliff, like 5 chapters in.
So I guess one thing I should talk about, and we'll talk about, again, more detail in part 2. This was originally a serial. It was originally published on kind of a, for lack of a better word, like a blog. It wasn't just J.Key's blog. It was published as part of a shared universe of people who would like put out a short story every month or a chapter of a ongoing series. I want to say, like, it's tough to find information about this, but what I have been able to find is that a lot of what, like, the blog wound up dying before he could finish the story. And so it seems like a lot of the first part of the book is taken from the serialization of Duke Lagrange. And it was just sort of edited for like minor word changes and spelling error fixes, grammar, things like that. And then it went straight into the book. But the demands of a novel and the demands of a serial are very different. And I do not feel like enough was done to adapt this into a novel. Because I feel like certain chapters are padded. I don't know if they were intentionally padded or if it was just a stream of consciousness style of writing, but the arguments are repeated, almost verbatim. Like I said, I could copy and paste pretty much any discussion, like any time Pohl and Duke speak, you could pretty much copy paste that anywhere in the book. After their initial meeting where he's like, Duke is their prisoner and then he eventually gets out and he never lets that dude live it down. Like, you can copy and paste any of those conversations anywhere in the book. They have the same conversation 5 or 6 times. And it gets to the point where it's like, I just started skipping. It's like, yeah, I get it. Duke thinks they were dumb to imprison him, even though if you had 1 ounce of empathy in your body, you would understand exactly why they're afraid of you.
Well, he only has empathy in his body for children, I guess.
But he's not even the one that bonds with the kid.
No. Well, they need something for Ashira to do. I mean, he has a katana, and that's it. And varying degrees of ninja power.
Like, we could literally spend all day discussing ways that this could be better.
Okay, so what kind of protagonist is Duke? Is he an anti-hero or a straight-up hero?
Straight up.
So, but he threatens to kill a crippled man because the crippled man said something mean to him.
But the whole second half of the book is filled with people saying, of Duke saying like, yeah, we got to get there and we got to kill this guy so your people can go free. And then the female leader of the group is like, and you need to get your ship, right? That's the whole reason you're here, because you need to get your ship. Wank, wank. Like, she knows, like, he cares about them now.
Oh, is that what I was supposed to get from that? I thought that was to remind the audience that, oh, actually, Duke is a little selfish deep down, and he just wants that ship.
No, I actually thought that Duke was like, because the whole thing is told from Duke's perspective, and we never hear Duke. Like, when Duke thinks about it, he thinks like, yeah, we gotta get this Orbius guy, we gotta take him down. I think he's supposed to be the kind of guy who's like snarky and sarcastic as like a defense mechanism, but Duke is also never allowed to be vulnerable or flawed enough to discuss why he might be using it as a defense mechanism.
I couldn't. Yeah, that's probably why I didn't recognize it. I thought the same thing about the defense mechanism at first, and then I thought I was wrong because he never really opens up, except his pants at the end for 3 minutes of ecstasy.
But again, like, that's the other thing. You just made it funnier than it was. Because it's also played that they go at it for 48 minutes, which I guess is supposed to be funny because that's a specific number of minutes. And it's not. And she also appears to have had a good time. Oh, and by the way, because we don't want to be like weird about it, like we don't want to make Duke like a bad guy who would just get with a girl and leave and abandon her. Like, Ja is also totally cool with it being a one-night stand.
Yeah,
like they have to have an explicit. Yeah, they have to have an explicit conversation about how she and Duke agree that this is just a one-time thing. They're just doing it to blow off steam.
I thought at the beginning he was a buffoon, and he was supposed to be a fun, charming buffoon, I guess, but he could do some bad stuff, and it didn't matter if I liked him or not. And then as the book went on, it tried to make him a hero.
Well, let's even talk about that. Let's talk about, now this isn't a buffoon archetype, but Robert Downey Jr. Playing Tony Stark in Iron Man. In Iron Man, he's a playboy who doesn't give a shit about anyone. And then eventually you realize as the plot goes on, part of the reason he doesn't give a shit about anyone is because he's got daddy issues and he's really afraid of like opening up to people. But you realize he does care about some things, and he doesn't want, like, once he sees people killed by his weapons, he has a realization that he was wrong to make these weapons kind of in the first place. that they're not doing what he thought they were doing. And that bugs him, that eats at his conscience. And so he has an arc where he goes from being a guy who didn't give a shit to being a guy who gives a shit, and that makes him a little bit better person. Doesn't completely change him. He's still a snarky asshole. But he does realize he has to make some concessions to the feelings of the people he realizes he's cared about. Like he stops being a snarky asshole to Pepper Potts. And he sort of starts to appreciate his bodyguard more. And like, because then he develops like real relationships, we like him a little bit more. He's still flawed, but we like him now. You could have done that with Duke, but again, then there would have had to be a moment where you didn't like Duke so much, where Duke had some problems.
There were plenty of moments I didn't like Duke so much. He threatened to murder a crippled man. It was played as if Duke was in the right to do that.
That's a lack of self-awareness.
He was the hero for threatening this crippled man with murder if he didn't grovel and apologize.
Well, and that's what I'm talking about. That's not seeing the spot you missed when you painted the wall. That's something
that's a good metaphor.
Like. I guarantee that Jake He didn't read it. He didn't read that situation that way. But somebody who doesn't have his perspective sees it and they're like, that's a little much, isn't it? I think he's probably a good guy, but those moments where it's like, I'm not used to just sleeping next to a vulnerable girl. It's like, oh no, that didn't sound the way you meant it. Yeah, that didn't sound the way you meant it to sound. You need to change that a little bit. And I really think that is though, like, that is him not understanding how I took that. He didn't properly communicate what he was trying to communicate.
Well, as I have thought, if J.K. is like me, because we have similar humor styles, he needed a Ben to sit down with him and go, this isn't fucking working. This isn't working. This needs to be cut. Like, he needed someone there who would look at his work and not be afraid to tell him, like, yeah, this isn't working. It's not doing so great. And I don't know if he had that person or not, but based on the work, that's what I'm inferring.
If he had that person, they did him a disservice. Or that person was also too close to the book. If he had that person, he had the wrong person doing that job. He needed somebody who was willing to disagree with him. And one of the reasons I think we've struggled with it too, because it is really hard to get like good editing and get good editors, because you need somebody who's going to take the time not just to read your book, but to really dissect it, sit down and talk about it with you, and help you brainstorm suggestions. And that's a big time commitment. It's very different from just asking your friends to like give it a thumbs up, thumbs down. And so we kind of teamed up initially to help each other get better at writing, and we would edit each other's stuff. And it probably is to our benefit that we have different personalities. Like, you have a tendency to go into like that humor that sometimes it doesn't always come across, and I have a tendency to go like way too douchey or lore heavy. And you laugh because you know I do. Because that's what you...
It is called Ben's Douche Philosophy Corner.
But you not being into that stuff, like if you were another person who was really into like that douchey philosophy stuff, we would get into a feedback loop and we'd produce bad work. Like, you help keep my feet on the ground and I help keep your feet on the ground. And the differing personalities helps. So if he had an editor, I'm going to guess the editor was just like him. It was like the editor probably had the same interests as him, read the same kind of books, the same background. And because I also get the vibe that there's a lot of inside jokes. Like, Holy Hedgehogs to me sounds like an inside joke. The Mecha Burger 9000 or whatever it's called that sometimes kills you. Like, we talked about what that could be in a reference to. Is it like one of those heart attack burgers or something? Is that what he was talking about? I don't know. But that's one of those things, like, if I were editing it, I'd be like, is that a reference to something? I don't know why you're coming back to this burger over and over again. Because the burger is like a repeated joke. It's there at the beginning, it's there at the end, and so it's like, I don't get it. I just don't get it.
It's there more than the fucking anthropomorphic musk ox.
It's there almost exactly as much as the anthropomorphic muskox.
Wouldn't it have been great if he fed that burger to Orbius and that's how he killed him?
That would have been awesome. That would have made the whole thing like a setup and payoff.
I just thought of that too. It's not particularly good writing, but it's better than what we got.
Yeah, if he had like gotten his ass totally kicked by Orbius, and at the very end he's like, "Look, before I die, I just need to know how this recipe tastes."
And Orbius, being a dumb villain, would go, "Fine," and he eats it and he dies. Even then,
like, let me say a positive thing. I think Orbius works for this story. I think Orbius is a good villain. He's a guy who's just a Joe Everyman who got a little taste of power and went absolutely fucking insane with it. And he doesn't think he's a villain, but he's clearly doing villainous things, and like, he wants people's approval. He's just kind of a weak-minded dude who got all this power. And he's like a Dr. Evil type.
We needed more of him.
Yeah, why was he not in the book more? Like, why didn't he show up more often? Why did we deal with General Gar? I think we're going to start closing out. So let's close out with some things we liked. I have a list of things I liked. Do you have anything you liked?
I'll chime in.
Okay, well, let me give one and then you give one. We'll see how long we can keep doing this. Thing I liked. I actually liked the Deus Ex Machina.
I liked the bar and the depiction of the bar, and I wanted more adventures in and around that bar.
I liked the ancient beings. I thought everything with them was good.
I liked when it was over. The pain had stopped.
I liked Vern as a character. Everything with Vern was very predictable, but I thought he set up Vern nicely as being a secret good guy.
I liked what I thought the story was going to be in my head. That was a really fun book.
I genuinely did like the conversation between Duke and Ja about Duke and Ishiro's past.
I did not like that because, it didn't reveal enough. And you never hear any more about this. And they actually characterized Pol first, I believe. They characterized, like, of the two people who are bickering back and forth, they characterized the wrong one.
Can I tell you, I'm going to flip it and reverse it, man. I'm going to say I like that. That's a good point. I think that was flawed, but I did actually, when we talk about failure to communicate, that was one time where it was clunky, but I did get what J.K. was going for there. The way they set up Pol, it eventually had to pay off. Like, they were going to work together. I thought that moment had come when
the temple
Pol agreed to take the watch.
Yeah, so did temple, I. Yeah. I was like, okay, cool. They're finally working together. And then it was just back to square fucking one.
Yeah, that was a bad choice. You can't have an arc develop and then turn into a circle and then start arcing again. That's annoying. I was trying to end on a positive note.
Here, let me help you with that positive note.
Once again, you distracted
me. I want to read a quick passage.
Oh.
Good idea, Ishiro. I'll cover you while you get us a torch going. I don't think we can go any farther without some light. I don't really want to hunker down now and wait until the morning. Those priests might change their minds and follow us in here. But I don't think we can go down the path in the dark either. We'd be sitting ducks. That's the wordiest goddamn way
That's the
of
wordiest
saying,
goddamn way to say thanks for lighting the torch.
Yeah, hey, good job lighting that torch. Let's go. Or even, Ishiro lit a torch.
Well, but then that passage continues on to be like, oh, is the sun coming out? It's weird that the sun would come out. I haven't seen a day this short since we went to that random planet in the random system. And it's so, like, I'm not exaggerating. That's what he says. And then it turns out the sun is not coming out. It's actually just a bunch of people with torches standing behind them. And he somehow didn't notice, like, the difference between sunlight and torchlight, which look literally nothing alike.
Maybe on that other weird planet, the sun was just a giant torch.
Maybe on that other weird planet, like, fire doesn't flicker.
Yeah.
God. I tried to be nice, but
I gotta keep bringing you down. I don't want you to end this on a positive note. This book
This may
awful.
be the worst one. This may be the worst one.
This book, not great. Needs a complete rewrite.
Well, and one thing we should say is, doing the podcast makes this whole experience a little bit worse, because it's not like you start reading a book by an indie author and you're like, oh, yeah, no, we have to finish it. Yeah, I think that that's a factor in how strongly we feel about it. Is normally this is the kind of book you just put down. So what I want to talk about in part 2, I just want to give you guys a quick preview. I want to talk about where this book started. I want the blog that it started on. I want to talk about the inspiration for the bar in the book. I want to talk about Star Wheel Books, which is the company that published and publishes the Duke Lagrange novels and all of J. Key's work. And I want to talk a little bit about independent publishing versus self-publishing and the similarities and differences between Duke Lagrange and Edenverse. And then you could come back for Nate. What is our next book?
Haroun and the Sea of Stories by Salman Rushdie.
Okay, so that's going to be an interesting about the author.
Oh, yes. Yes, it will be a very interesting about the author. That's true. The book itself
feels heavy.
The book itself is a lighter read, and I encourage anyone, if you haven't been reading along with us, which you should, for the most part, not this book, but
yeah, I don't think you've built up the trust with the audience to say that at this point.
Definitely read Haroun and the Sea of Stories, though. Like, it's a genuinely good book. It's 224 pages. It's light and something you can get into very easily. And I think we're going to start trying for weekly episodes, right, Ben?
Yeah, so I think we'll talk about that more at the end of part 2 of this one. We're going to ramp up our production schedule, now that Nate's expecting a child. It just seemed like a good time.
It's true. I needed some more challenges. Life was too easy.
Yeah. Just in addition to doing our one book a month, we have a few one-shot episodes planned that we think you guys would really like. And if you do like them or don't like them, we would love to hear your feedback, because as we've stated, it's very difficult to be your own editor. As longtime listeners will know, you can check us out on Twitter at WABpod. You can check out our additional show notes and commentary at blog.wordsaboutbooks.ninja. You can check out our own writing at poorlywritten.ninja. And if you want to follow along with us, if you want to follow our reviews and keep up to date on what we're reading, you can check out our Goodreads group. It is Words About Books Podcast. You can just go into the Goodreads group section and search for that. I also think I'm going to start publishing book reviews on the blog. All right, get out.
Bye. Okay, let me go grab a drink real quick, and I will tell you something about writing. Papa Nate. Hold on.
Did he call himself Papa Nate? I think he did. You want to make that sound you made for me? We'll have to edit a lot of that.